Hey everyone, welcome back to the news. So, you've probably noticed the likes of Tencent and NetEase significantly moving into the Western gaming market. Initially, this was via lots of investments. Then over time, we saw those investments grow and grow. We've recently seen partnering with big groups like, say, Activision Blizzard, Call of Duty Mobile. We've also seen these companies start their own studios in the West, with those studios making what you'd sort of call Western games, right? Like Lightspeed, as an example. Lightspeed LA. There's also David Kim's studio. There's a whole bunch going on. You might be thinking, why? Is this just the relentless quest for more money? In a way, it is. But we have to look at what is motivating the speed of this quest. And today's story gives us the perfect way to do that so that we can all understand what's actually going on in the gaming market. So, it's been a bit of a situation where Tencent, their stock fell 10.8%, NetEase by 15.7%, and while those stocks did claw back a little bit, we have to look at why. Because basically, there is investor fear over China clamping down in the domestic market. And what's odd about this is we have one state agency basically fighting another state agency. So I'll go first to the inciting incident of this. So their stocks took a bit of a hit when Economic Information Daily, which is part of the Xinhua news agency, which is ran by the state, they released an article that called games spiritual opium and electronic drugs. Now, you might just think that's, some newspaper said that games are addictive. What's new? Well, number one, it's coming from something operated by Xinhua, which is a state network. And also opium. And before we break into the rest of the story, Matt, I think it's worth everybody being up to speed with just how important opium is here.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone knows anything about their history in China and the history between China and Britain, opium was a very, very, very big thing. They literally fought wars over Britain, using opium to their own end somewhat. It's but basically,
yeah, like the Brits basically decided to get them hooked on opium so they could sell them the opium and a bunch of other stuff, all like methods of control.
Yeah, so opium has been this really, really first, for a little while, positively used in Chinese history, because they're all like, oh, this is just class stuff. But then they realize, what happens when you make, opium, smoking opium in the brothels a reasonable thing to do culturally. Then you've got, suddenly you've got a problem. Yeah. Where your entire workforce is just, wrecked. Everyone just falls to pieces. Yeah. And the fabric of society starts to fray. It's
not exactly like with gin in London, where gin was just severe alcoholism in the less well off. This is way in the past. But yeah, it's really big, and this was a time in Chinese history that things were not going great. They were not going great for China, and a lot of the current narrative, the current thing, is them as a country overcoming a kind of I don't mean a century of shame or something, but a bad, the bad times, right? So that is why in the Chinese cultural context, from what we, of course, from our position here in Ireland, can understand, that this is a pretty major thing. And that is why, as soon as that happens, you see Tencent and NetEase both taking big hits in the stock market. Now, what's interesting is that article was deleted and then republished without the offending terminology, but the damage had been done. And in a sort of reference to this, in a response to this, the China Game Publishers Association Publications Committee, GPC, said in an interview that games can have a positive impact in society because they're able to broadcast positive energy. Games like the PUBG clone or reskin, whatever. Game for peace.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's a bit funny, isn't it? Yeah. And they also say that online games are not fierce floods or savage beasts. Now, what's interesting here is that the GPC are also state-owned. They are the gaming wing of the China Audio, Video, and Digital Publishing Association that reports directly to the Central Propaganda Department of the Chinese Communist Party. So we have a very bizarre situation where one sort of arm of the general state apparatus does this article, and then another arm has to respond to it. I don't really know what that's like in the context of the CCP, but it does seem quite weird. And in a world where these things are going on, I think everybody can see very, very obviously why a lot of these big gaming companies are going to see, oh, well, what if the wind is no longer in our favor at home? Well, shit, we need to be in other markets. Even though, of course, the domestic Chinese market is absolutely gargantuan. It's just sort of gargantuan that we in the West don't really see. So it's interesting. Now, the GPC said that the Chinese government's attempts to regulate gaming are specific and targeted, that they are not ill-considered blanket rules that are aimed at controlling the wider games industry. They're emphasizing the regulations are focused on gaming addiction in minors, and these measures do include, of course, the real name verifications and the facial recognition drama that I believe we covered on the show as well, where both Tencent and NetEase were pressured to introduce these systems early, right? Because if you can see what the sort of way the wind's going to be blowing, you're obviously going to do things preemptively. So it's pretty major. Now, of course, minors have been circumventing the current systems and regulations. That's just going to make the future systems and regulations be more tight, be more well-armed. Now, Tencent recently announced that they're going to be further restricting the amount of time that minors can spend playing games, reducing it from 1.5 hours on weekdays and 3 hours on public holidays to 1 hour of games on weekdays, 2 hours on holidays. Oh, that would suck. They're also preventing children under the age of 12 from spending money in games, which, funny enough, is actually something I think a lot of people, even over here, wouldn't be too pissed off at. And they did call out that spending from under 16s accounts for just 3.2% of the total gaming revenue of Tencent. NetEase have also said they're going to be creating a green cyberspace. Well, it sounds like branding to me. So that's basically what's going on. Now, to some of this, we've got some comment from Daniel Ahmad, who, of course, works extensively with that market, saying that this is the situation is not because of any new regulation or recent change. It's because state-backed media raised concerns over ongoing video game addiction among minors, and people are speculating that the industry will therefore see tightened regulations or drastic changes, because when that article comes out from the state media, it makes people think, oh, well, clearly the state are thinking about this and maybe we'll do something. Then investors get the willies and they sell. Price goes down. Now, further update from Daniel. The article, of course, just the comment on that article going back online, but the spiritual opium bit being removed. As to why, he says, because that part never reflected to the government line, given the support that they give the games industry and esports in particular, plus recent positive comments at China Joy. He says that, as he's been saying for the last few years, all of this concern is purely about gaming addiction amongst minors, and that's going to be a focus going forward, and that's why Tencent were going preemptive. So it's that weird situation. It seems like, from Daniel's take, China's not just going to turn around and decide to turn off the games market, which I think, yeah, of course they wouldn't. But you just can see that any perceived volatility, even though there was positive commentary at China Joy, even this little thing happening caused a bit of a rumble. And ultimately, businesses will want to be doing business in a stable regulatory environment. There's obviously some fear there. That's why we're seeing this go on.
Yeah, I mean, like, the comparison to opium still, like, boggles my mind. Not even boggle in the way of, like, I'm confused by it, because it's almost the opposite, because I really can see the comparison. Because it's extremely addictive behavior. The same thing happens where, you want to check out from reality, you don't need to use opiates anymore, you can just play video games. So I can see where, the history of it is, it was just completely eradicated in the 50s. 10 million addicts were forced into compulsory treatment. Dealers were just gotten rid of, like. So you can see, even if they did walk it back, if you hear a government who's, historically very, very heavy on the regulation to the point where, you can play a game for half the length of time you'd watch a movie on a weekday if you're a kid now. If you see anything vaguely supported by that government going, this is a little bit like opiates, isn't it? You're like, hang on, are you just going to like take all of Tencent's executives out the back and get rid of them someday? Because I think it's because it's actually a real concern.
Just ask Jack Ma.
Yeah.
Of course, with Ant Financial, Jack, he just went a wee bit too close to the sun. Yep. Even though, of course, he is a Communist Party member. But there's all the weird stuff where I actually don't know where that story is right now, but it was just, where in the world is Jack Ma?
It disappeared for a bit.
Just this thing of whenever the Chinese billionaires get a little bit too powerful, sometimes things happen.
Yeah, so you can see the comparison to video games being terrifying for someone who's working in video games. We're like, no, this isn't that dangerous, but, if media shifts that way, if opinion shifts that way, if the government shifts that way, then your entire business, your entire financial model could be killed in just one day, just because the regulation can come in. So it is genuinely a terrifying thing for everyone involved. I'd say to an extent, even people consuming it, where you're like, kind of, are you going to start losing your social credit score because you play games as an adult? Even if it's all like, we'll regulate the kids so they literally can't, which is a step I'm not personally too comfortable with anyway. Mm-hmm. That shouldn't be the fucking state's job. But as soon as you bring that up to the adult level as well, where, you're not going to regulate them, you're not going to say, okay, so no one's allowed to play, Arena of Valor, or, sorry, what is it called? Honor of Kings.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not allowed to play that for more than 2 hours a day anymore, or your social credit score drops. That's the stuff that will like come in just before you even imagine it happening. It's just, there it is, quick as that.
I think in a world where there was less frostiness between states, you could see, say, the game skeptics in America, game skeptics in the UK, using something like this as more of an example. Like we did see the DCMS, was it Culture, Media, Sports, whatever, the UK body. There were a few times where they talked about what countries like China and South Korea are doing about video game addiction, right? In minors. And you're like, oh, okay. Maybe we don't want government committees like that to be taking big inspiration. Now, there's another story for us to cover relatively soon about that kind of happening in the UK. Yep. Well, yeah, I wonder, like, in a world where there wasn't so much frostiness between states, would there be more of a willingness to sort of follow this example by some of the countries that are now grappling a little bit more with video game related issues?
I completely think so. I completely think that, like, if your business model relies on anything except, well, if it relies on exploitation of anyone who isn't a fully like able adult who can spend their money of their own accord, if you rely on a lot of income or a lot of your player base coming from younger people and children, I think you're going to run into problems globally. And I think that's why we see, it is literally why we see all of this investment coming into different parts of the West, where, China's AAA market isn't quite as developed yet. It's definitely getting there, because we've got Black Myth Wukong, we've got, I can't remember the name of it. It was shown at the Xbox Indie one. Yeah. I can't remember, but it looked like a fantastic, AAA, action adventure game. It looked fantastic as well. But those aren't proven yet. So there'll definitely be investment happening internally there. But I feel like the Chinese government are likely to, throw a few more babies out with the bathwater than anything in the West, just because of the, I think Western governments would be a little bit more inclined to listen to EA, Activision Blizzard, and Ubisoft if they're coming and going, hello, there's more cultural engagement, but also they're billion-dollar companies, and they're not going to let that shit slide.
There is a bit of me that just thinks, you've got games like Genshin, people probably just blowing 40 grand.
Yeah.
On at least they're not JPEGs. They're at least animated
they're characters.
3D models. So that's a pro over some other gacha games. Yep. I actually do really like the game of Genshin Impact, but you can see how a few stories of whaling and financial ruination via games like that, you can see how just a few stories, that's all you need to start a big fire.
Yeah, it's like I think that's one of the big things, because it's a story we'll talk about later that happened in the UK with someone's personal experience. But all I think it takes is, it takes one major news story of like someone in there, somewhere say between 12 and 15, accidentally racking up a bill of a couple $100,000 in Ultimate Team, not having a way out of their parents, and killing themselves or something like that. Because that's the kind of story that would absolutely explode and everyone would talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, look at Robin Hood, right? Remember the guy, I forget, I think he was massively using I think it was options trading or something. But whatever it was, the numbers went very, very, very down. Person killed himself.
Yeah.
And that is obviously a very large, number one, a massive tragedy. Also does make us think about just how things are going, and you can absolutely see a similar, very unfortunate case happening.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of less a story about video games and more a story about, the government regulation and stuff like that. But there's something I want to bring up that I was literally looking at earlier today. Let me just find it real quick.
Yeah, sure.
It's obviously it's British people being funny on Twitter, so it is the hashtag is Paddy Power leave the kids alone. And I don't know what actually incited it, but it's something about Paddy Power used in some advertisement. It was clearly more focused on younger people. Obviously, they will go to lengths to go, no, don't gamble if you're under 18, etc., etc. But something about the tone of the advertisement felt that way. And then as well as there are 55,000 problem gamblers between the age of 11 and 16 in the UK. All it takes is a gacha game or FIFA Ultimate Team to be connected to video games. You can see how the spiral will go out of control and take everything down with it.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we can see that in the West from our perspective. You can see how in China the same thing could happen very easily with the same mechanics of just all it takes is a couple stories of some maybe powerful or influential person's kid being lost to maybe they played 16 hours of something Diablo, and then like what happened in the good old days of net cafes where people would just play video games and just be dead.
Well, I'd say this, right? Look at the UK situation. It seems obvious to many people that some of Johnson's policy positions are informed by his current girlfriend.
Yeah.
Now, that is very much pertaining to environment-related issues. Mm-hmm. But imagine if you have a similar situation.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a kid and some problem video game behavior being involved. All you need is just a few key people who are really going to fight that issue. And the thing about data is, when the world is this big, you can almost always find data to support your argument. You can almost always create a compelling narrative.
Yep.
So, yeah. I think overall, there's a lot to think about here. We'll have to dive into the UK situation pretty soon. Yeah. But this is important shit. I'm happy we just recorded Splitgate. Because at least because we've done a positive story, I am okay to talk about the less savory or the less good whatever parts. So that's that. I think if anyone wanted to understand why the Tencents and the NetEases are really trying to move into the West, you need only look at what's going on in their home market, and they're obviously going to want to diversify. Yep. So that's the story. Hope you found it interesting. We'll catch you next time. See ya.